As you know, our practice is not to confirm the existence of ongoing investigations, especially those investigations that involve classified matters. But in unusual circumstances, where it is in the public interest, it may be appropriate to do so, as Justice Department policies recognize. This is one of those circumstances. I have been authorized by the Department of Justice to confirm that the FBI, as part of our counterintelligence mission, is investigating the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. And that includes investigating the nature of any links between individuals associated with the Trump campaign and the Russian government, and whether there was any coordination between the campaign and Russia's efforts. As with any counterintelligence investigation, this will also include an assessment of whether any crimes were committed. Because it is an open, ongoing investigation and is classified, I cannot say more about what we are doing and whose conduct we are examining. At the request of congressional leaders, we have taken the extraordinary step, in coordination with the Department of Justice, of briefing this Congress's leaders, including the leaders of this committee, in a classified setting in detail about the investigation. But I can't go into those details here. I know that is extremely frustrating to some folks, but it is the way it has to be, for reasons that I hope you and the American people can understand. The FBI is very careful in how we handle information about our cases and about the people we are investigating. We are also very careful about the way we handle information that may be of interest to our foreign adversaries. Both of those interests are at issue in a counterintelligence investigation. Please don't draw any conclusions from the fact that I may not be able to comment on certain topics. I know speculating is part of human nature, but it really isn't fair to draw conclusions simply because I say that I can't comment. Now, some folks may want to make comparisons to past instances where the Department of Justice and the FBI have spoken about the details of some investigations. But please keep in mind that those involve the details of completed investigations. Our ability to share details with the Congress and the American people is limited when those investigations are still open, which I hope makes sense. We need to protect people's privacy. We need to make sure we don't give other people clues as to where we're going. We need to make sure that we don't give information to our foreign adversaries about what we know or don't know. We just cannot do our work well or fairly if we start talking about it while we're doing it. So we will try very, very hard to avoid that, as we always do.
I did not have communications with the Russians. Let me repeat that. I did not have communications with the Russians. As we all know now, that wasn't true. Attorney General Sessions met at least twice with the Russian ambassador in 2016, once in July, an event during the Republican National Convention, and once in September in a private meeting in his Senate office. But Attorney General Sessions did not acknowledge the fact that his testimony misrepresented the truth until the Washington Post published an article exposing his meetings with the Russian ambassador. In the 7 weeks between his appearance before this committee and the publication of that article, Attorney General Sessions had ample opportunity to come clean and correct the record, but that's not what he did. So after an embarrassing story in the Post describing undisclosed meeting with the very same Russian official whose communications forced the president's national security advisor to resign, Attorney General Sessions hastily called a press conference and announced that he would recuse himself from overseeing any Justice Department investigation into Russian interference with the election. So, Mr. Rosenstein, now that the Attorney General has recused himself, it's your turn to answer my question, the very same question. Again, here is the question I asked then Senator Sessions, and that I would like you to answer now. If there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
If there is predication to believe that such a communication was in violation of federal law, Senator, I would ensure an appropriate investigation.
Now, Mr. Rosenstein, do you understand that you have an ongoing obligation to update your testimony and correct any inaccuracies or mistakes that you discover after you leave the hearing today?
You're making me very self-conscious, Senator, but yes, I believe I do. I'm trying to be as careful as I can.
Good. I must have just taken it for granted that witnesses understood their obligation to correct inaccuracies in their testimony, but evidently that obligation was not known to Attorney General Sessions. Yesterday, 4 days after the press conference at which he announced his recusal, and 55 days after his hearing, Attorney General Sessions finally wrote to the committee to update his testimony. In that updated testimony, the Attorney General references a letter written by the Democratic members of this committee on March 3rd. Attorney General Sessions said, and I quote, "The letter asks why I did not supplement the record to note any contact with the Russian before its disclosure. Having considered my answer responsive and no one having suggested otherwise, there was no need for a supplemented answer." So it would seem that in the Attorney General's view, unless this committee has reason to believe that a witness provided false testimony, or unless this committee suggests that a witness's answer is grossly misleading or unresponsive, that witness is relieved of his or her sworn duty to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. But I don't think that's how it works. And in light of Attorney General Sessions' failure to recognize his obligation to this body, I thought it was important for me to make sure that you clearly understand this obligation. And you do understand this obligation, right?
I believe I do, Senator.
Okay. I think Senator Sessions should come back. I think he owes it to this committee to come back and to explain himself. Because he also says in his letter, may I just... If you're making a statement to me, make it very quick. If you were asking him a question, you would have time to ask. I will not. This will be very short. He says, let's see, I did not mention communications I had with the Russian ambassador over the years because the question did not ask about them. I asked him what he would do as Attorney General if it was true that members of the campaign had met with the Russians. So he says, I did not mention communications I had with the Russian ambassador over the years because the question did not ask about them. He answered a question I didn't ask. And for him to put this in his letter as a response is insulting. And he should come back and explain himself, Mr. Chairman. I think he owes that to us. Because this appears to me like he was, and I've bent over backward, not to say that he lied. He needs to come back. I've bent over backward. I have given him the benefit of the doubt, but he has to come back.
Mr. Chairman, may I, Sorry, may I just make one clarification, and I apologize, but Senator Franken's comments, I think, make it important for me to make this point. That is that I want to make sure I didn't misspeak earlier when I was asked about whether or not I would announce that an investigation was ending regarding Russia. I want to make sure you're all clear on this, that I do not know if there is an investigation. I don't know anything but what I've read in the newspapers at this point.
Well, I actually find it very disturbing that you did not read the declassified report on Russia's activities during the election. I find that very, very disturbing.
Whether it's Paul Manafort in his Russian contacts. I mean, it's not a question simply of dealing with Russia. It's a question that we have now 17 intelligence agencies in the United States of America unanimously agreeing that Russia meddled in this and tried to discredit our democratic process. So, I mean, you know, that's whom they were dealing with. It wasn't a question of just making a quick buck.
So David, I mean, all sorts of questions come out of this. Is it enough for the Attorney General to recuse himself? Do we need to think about something bigger? I mean, there's a lot of conversation now about whether there should be an outside, independent investigation. I mean, what needs to happen right now?
I think the recusal is right. The calls for resignation strike me as completely over the top. I think we do need to know why Russia, like, there are 200-odd countries in the world. Why has so much of this administration focused on Russia? Now, is it because Donald Trump is very sensitive to the charge that he was handed the election by Russia and he's sort of Russia-focused? But it's the Russian obsession predates that, which is why I think, you know, after he declared bankruptcy, there are not a lot of Americans necessarily wanting to invest in Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. So who was doing all the investing? Mm-hmm. He's got all these luxury properties around the world. Who was buying? And so, to me, it's why the Russia focus. Is it some ideological thing he has for Russia? Is it some man crush on Vladimir Putin? I don't know, but somehow that's the part that needs to be investigated. I'm generally not for special prosecutors and things because they tend to run out of control. But getting to the core of that issue, I don't know how you do it, but that is how I think we should do it.
Well, that's the only way you could get to some of this.
Well, I think, Judy, first of all, I think that David raises the questions that do demand an answer, and how are we going to get that answer? The recusal, he had no choice but to recuse himself. The red Republican wall was breaking when Kevin McCarthy, the Republican House leader, calls for his recusal. When Jason Chaffetz, one of the last defenders of Donald Trump, having said after the Hollywood Access tape that he couldn't face his 14-year-old daughter and then still support Donald Trump, then 2 weeks later endorsed again Donald Trump for president, he said he had to recuse, Jeff Sessions had to, and so did Rob Portman, the senator from Ohio. So I think that this was what he had to do. The problem with the House Intelligence Committee and the Senate Intelligence Committee is that the White House felt comfortable enough to call them and ask them to be the character witness with the press. Richard Burr, the senator from North Carolina, and Devin Nunes, the congressman from California. So the question is, the only time you move to an independent, if you had an ideal Baker Hamilton 9/11 type group, is, quite honestly, when there is a lack of faith and a lack of confidence in the existing process.
Yeah, this is why institutions matter so much. So in Watergate, you had, sure, it was partisan, but you still could go to a congressional hearing and there'd be some sense there'd be a Howard Baker who would be an honest
That's exactly
broker,
right.
Or Hamilton, Lee Hamilton, or you had people like that. And maybe there are people like that floating around Washington who you could appoint, like a 9/11 commission. But the official institutions of Congress, not a lot of credibility there right now, and not a lot of expectation they would act in any way other than as partisan bodies. And so this is what we see when we get the breakdown of institutions.
And meanwhile,
Angus King from Maine and John McCain from Arizona.
An independent.
I mean, independent, both established independents and respect. I mean, if you're going to go that direction.
But I was just going to say, the way the president is responding today is by tweeting pictures of Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer meeting with the Russian ambassador a few years ago. Let's talk about the speech. Tuesday night, it feels longer ago than that, Mark. Do we know now more about what President Trump's priorities are after that speech?
Not really. I mean, we have absolutely, we know general objectives, but we have no idea how we're going to get from here to there. He got enormous amount of praise, and which basically lasted until the stories about Russia and Attorney General Sessions came out. But there's a